author, columnist, managing editor of LibertyNation.com, podcast host and conservative policy advocate.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Hello and welcome to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm your host, Mark Angelides. On today's special show, we examine the upcoming Supreme Court session, what are the big cases to watch for freedom lovers, and analyze the epic VP debate. Remember, this show is proudly sponsored by LibertyNation.com, where you can access podcasts, breaking news, analysis, and a range of biting and brilliant shows to whet your appetite for freedom and your fondness for the great American Constitution. The first Monday of October, traditionally when the Supreme Court comes back, and this year is no different. The Supreme Court is back in session this week, and what they have coming in store for us, well, that's why we have with us Liberty Nation's legal affairs editor, Mr. Scott Cosenza. Scott, thanks for being back on the show.
Thank you, Mark. Always a pleasure.
So I'm excited. The last SCOTUS session, Supreme Court session, was fantastic in terms of really interesting constitutional decisions. Now, I know that blew a lot of people's heads clean off, as it were, legislatively speaking, judicially speaking. But I think for those people who do enjoy interesting decisions out of the court, it was a great season finale. So what does the sequel have in store for us?
Well, yeah, I'm a limited government advocate and fan, Mark, and to have some wins in the limited government column and a court that seems tilted in that direction is a welcome change from so much of my life observing the court and seeing a majority of justices seem to favor the other direction. So as long as the hits are coming out the right way, that to me is what makes for a good session. I cannot be as detached from it as a pure academic might and say, well, these are fascinating issues and interesting to observe their examination. Well,
the thing that really most captivates me about the last season, I'm referring to it like a TV show because this is my version of reality TV. It's my Real Housewives of America, SCOTUS edition. But what really fascinated me was that the cases that are decided are ones that will have ramifications across the country and therefore the world. Literally this year, next year, going forward, these are things that have ramifications and undulations that you can see playing out in real time.
It is, and it's an amazing. The way I think about that is it's amazing how much influence Donald Trump's Supreme Court selections have had on the country and will continue to going forward. It's quite remarkable.
So, as a limited government fan, I guess is the right word, the aficionado of all things limited government, what are the big cases that you're going to be keeping your eye on and reporting on, of course, for the pages of LibertyNation.com?
Yes. Well, I can't say that I am going to report on all of them for the pages of LN because we have a stable of great writers and some others may handle some of them. But I picked out 5 cases that I think are a bit interesting for us to talk about here.
Scott Cosenza's Desert Island top 5 Supreme Court cases.
Well,
coming in at number 5.
For this term so far, because we might remind everybody that cases are accepted on a rolling basis for the term upcoming. So the term that's about to start in October will go forward and will conclude, if history is our guide, by July the 1st, 2025. And as cases present themselves for consideration, the Supreme Court, people file what's called a petition for certiorari. That is the petition they file in the Supreme Court for the Supreme Court to hear their issue. And if the Supreme Court will say yes, then they'll get on the schedule until about mid-spring, in which case, unless it's an urgent matter, they'll just push it over into the October 2025 seating. So without further ado, let's get into it.
Well, there was plenty of ado there, but very good information. Very educational.
In no particular order.
No
by
particular
the way.
order.
Giving
Okay.
These. One, we have Food and Drug Administration v. Wages and Lion Investments, LLC. And This concerns whether the Court of Appeals erred in setting aside an FDA order denying a company's application to market flavored e-cigarettes as arbitrary and capricious. So can the FDA stop companies from marketing flavored nicotine replacement products, e-cigarette vape type stuff? When the Trump presidency was first confronted by this, the FDA was going to make it so that e-cigarette stuff was going to be banned. They were just going to ban it because they said it's being regulated like a drug. They're dispensing nicotine like a drug without FDA authorization. And the wild popularity of the e-cigarette juice, if you call it that, basically made them dial it back. And Trump's sort of skepticism, I think, about big government action maybe also played a hand in that. So we'll see. Right now, it's legal for sale, but you can't do that, the marketing like they want to. And how it's captioned again by the people who wish to ban it is that any discussion of flavorings or colors is an appeal towards children. And of course, adults eat candy bars too. So, you know.
Absolutely, but children don't have disposable income of such a great level to engage in 1,000 candy bar a week habit. Not like me, like some other people.
Not to mention that it's prohibited for sale to children. So that's another reason why the government might make it legal for companies to advertise, the sale of something.
Okay, and the broader ramifications of that are, of course, that it presumably the small government approach there is that it's none of the government's business what types of flavor or a product that is legally available for sale.
No, you're wrong, Mark. That's not an accurate statement of what the interest is for the small government advocate. What the small government advocate's interest is there is no specific grant of authority from Congress to the FDA to regulate this, which then you could apply consequences and accountability to the legislators who would vote for such a thing or not. This is about delegation. And this is about whether or not when the FDA, when they pass a broad grant of authority for the FDA to regulate drugs, for instance, does that include this type of thing? Or should it be more specific? And for the limited government advocate, it is, hey, if you're going to tell people you can't do or say something, or maybe we'll put you in a cage, which is the end consequence, right, of disobeying a government ruling or order, then they should actually have that accountability and be forced to vote on it rather than just shuffling it off to the bureaucrat with some broad grant of authority that was given decades ago, even before the invention of e-cigarette technology or the vape.
Obviously, I'm not a lawyer, nor do I play one on television, but wouldn't this fall under the recent Chevron deference in terms of a grant of authority? The recent decision on the Chevron deference?
Not according to the administration. No, the deference is when there's an ambiguity involved.
Okay.
Whether or not it will be kind of tossed to the government and given their agency deference or not. This is, I think, less of the ambiguous sort.
Okay, great. So what's up for next on your Desert Island top 5?
Next up is Free Speech Coalition v. Paxton.
Okay.
And this involves spicy content, we might say, on the internet, explicit content that Texas and other states have said adult content providers online need to get an ID or some sort of robust age statement from the user rather than just clicking a button that says, I'm over age, whatever, and it's okay for me to view this thing before they display content that they otherwise could not, or not otherwise, could never display to a minor. The appeals court applied what's called a rational basis review of the decision. This is out of the conservative Texas judiciary, including the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals. And the Free Speech Coalition says that strict scrutiny should be applied because even though it's sexually explicit material, it's still covered under the free speech protections of the First Amendment. And so access to the spicy content may be further restricted or unleashed, as it were, depending on the ruling.
We're going to come back with the continuation of Scott Cosenza's Desert Island Top 5 Supreme Court cases for the upcoming term after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
And we're back on Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I'm still your host, Mark Angelides, and we are again joined by Liberty Nation's Legal Affairs Editor, Scott Cosenza. Now, in the first part of the show, we started off talking Scott Cosenza's Desert Island Top 5 Supreme Court cases for the upcoming Supreme Court term. We did 2 down. We've done 2, so we've got 3 more left. Which one comes in next, Scott?
We had, was it Marvin Gaye and Pink Floyd already, right? So
we did
wait,
those. If you want to find out specifically which tracks, go back
list.
And watch the first segment.
Right. All right. Garland v. Vanderstock is next, and that concerns
presumably this is Merrick rather than Judy.
That is a ghost gun case. This is the passion of, there are some the low-hanging fruit, if you will, for those who wish to increase gun controls on the American people. It is an easy sell, I think, for a lot of people to suggest that it's not okay to have unregisterable guns. These are guns that are essentially homemade guns. With the advent of 3D printing, there's been a remarkable use of that. I think it was the guy who invented the 3D printed AR-15, Corey, I forget his last name, but I think he said, I'm just trying to give appropriate credit for the idea because it's not mine. At some point in the not too distant future, any gun control is going to be silly because the ability to print at home robust guns that require no expensive machining is coming. And once it does, just having that file is all you'll need. Just like having a Word document file is all you need to go then, turn on your computer and tell your computer to print that file. And the same thing will be true with guns. But until then, anyway, before it's superfluous, there's a regulation that bans the ghost guns or allows the government to regulate them as firearms and therefore effectively, sort of ban their homemade production. And the Texas judge, a conservative, Texas is really out there in terms of, we used to joke about the Ninth Circuit being wildly kind of on left wing, bleeding edge. And now the Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals and the Texas judiciary sort of that for the right. And we can look at abortion decisions and gun decisions as we talk about that. But basically they said, hey, you can't regulate these things as firearms. You're banned from doing so. The people's right to keep and bear arms includes to manufacture ghost guns and not have them regulated like firearms, requiring, for instance, filing of forms and imposition of serial numbers on the devices. Well, the Supreme Court granted the government an emergency stay from that decision. So they said, okay, while we're going to think about and then ultimately decide this case at the Supreme Court, you can still enforce a ban on ghost guns. So this will decide that rule. Can the government treat ghost guns like regular firearms?
I have a suspicion that this will end up actually back at the Supreme Court again, because there's bound to be a follow-on challenge if Mr. Garland fails to get his way on this, I should suspect.
It's never-endingly frustrating for me, Mark, when the Supreme Court rules, especially on gun cases, when you know that the rule that they establish is immediately going to be challenged or require fine-tuning, and they don't just go the extra step of doing it. However, it is in their mandate for good jurisprudence to judge as little as they can, if you will, right? Because it is an anti-democratic process, the Supreme Court, and they're not gods, and so it's better to leave as much to the political process as possible while constraining themselves to the core issue that must be examined. So it's frustrating for me when it happens like that too, but also it's for the greater good that they only take as small a bite as they have to on any
leave
issue.
the apple largely intact. So number 2 on your list, Scott.
Well, we're at we're not at number 2 because we already had the first segment, Mark, where we discussed the first 2.
Sorry,
So that
one
was
of the
3.
remaining 2.
Now
So number 4
now
on
we're
your
at number
list.
4, right? Lest we have me lose my place, and it is United States versus Scrimeti, and that is an issue as to whether or not it's legal for Tennessee to prohibit all medical treatment intended to, and I'll quote here, allow a minor to identify with or live as a purported identity inconsistent with the minor's sex. So basically, the Tennessee authorities said to doctors in the state, you can't do this gender affirming care and have trans minors be transitioned, I guess, or even more, as the text indicates. And there's the claim that violates the Equal Protection Clause, that they have the right to be treated for their medical needs, which is what they're considering this, and that this is an illegal imposition on that. And so it's, the first time, I think, or well, I guess the bathroom issue was the first, but this is the first time the medical transitioning issue, I think, has reached the court. And I expect, as transitioners and detransitioners continue to kind of become adults, we're going to see more interesting cases around these issues.
I suspect this will balloon into possibly one of the most important issues of the next decade. And unfortunately, there's always going to be a human cost to that. So, Scott, your remaining top pick for
this is I thought kind of interesting. This is called Facebook versus Amalgamated Bank. And what Facebook did was they filed a disclosure with the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, discussing the hypothetical damage that could be done if their users' data was misappropriated. And they talked about it as a hypothetical, but it had already occurred. Like Cambridge Analytica had already misused the user's data. And this is a shareholder derivative suit. The shareholders are saying that the Facebook management committed fraud against the shareholders, because what they should have done was be honest and say, hey, it's not a hypothetical. This happened. You can't couch it as a hypothetical and here's some downside for the company when you know it's happened. You have to say it happened, and then the hits will come in the marketplace, and then the shareholders or would-be shareholders can react. And so I just think it was, an interesting thing about these companies that seem to operate as if the shareholders are the little guy rather than the actual owners of the corporation. It's fun to kick Meta also because of their wanton discrimination against free market and conservative ideas.
Final question for you, Scott. Do you expect over the next term for the composition of the Supreme Court to change?
Well, if we have a presidential election that occurs in November, and that person will then become president in January, hopefully, if things go as they're laid out in the constitutional order. And we have some justices that are getting on in years, and depending on who is president, I wouldn't be surprised to see if one or more of those would announce that they were retiring from the court, and to see new justices appointed. And then there's also the threat from court packing, ever present, Mark.
Ever present. Scott Cosenza, thanks ever so much for being back with us.
Thank you.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Some say it was the greatest vice presidential debate of all time. Others say it was a complete win for Tim Walz. Others say quite different. We're very fortunate to have with us today on the show Liberty Nation's chief political analyst, Graham J. Noble, who has been following not only the aftermath of the vice presidential debate hosted by CBS, but also what's been happening in the media thereafter. And Graham, thanks for being here.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks for having me.
So I watched it, I wrote about it, and for me it was, I thought that was one of the best debates in terms of performance for J.D. Vance specifically that I've seen in a very, very long time. What was your take?
Yeah, definitely. I thought Vance was very impressive generally. I thought he definitely commanded kind of the the airtime, if for want of a better term, in that when it was his turn to respond to a question or respond to something that Walt said, he kind of gave a lot of detail. He was very masterful in explaining, getting over his point and explaining exactly what he meant. And I thought he was very good. He is he's a sharp guy. So, yeah, I thought his performance was very good. I think the whole Trump team should be very pleased with how he handled it.
I love the way that you phrase that. The Trump team should be very pleased because there's often a suspicion that presidents choose their vice presidential running mates based on somebody who won't make them look worse. So they always choose somebody who's in certain departments fractionally lesser than they are. And I think
So what you're saying is this is why Kamala Harris chose Tim Walz, perhaps?
I mean, I'm not suggesting that. Well, we'll let the audience decide that. But but you had JD Vance, who, let's be fair, I mean, he performed better than Donald Trump did in
Oh,
not just
yes,
this
I
most
agree.
recent debate
Mhm.
against Kamala Harris.
Mhm.
The prior presidential debate against Joe Biden, that was really just Joe Biden's loss more than anything else.
Yes. Yeah.
And then, of course, there was the 2020 and 2016 ones. And I would say that Vance performed better on those, possibly gaining quite a statuesque figure amongst that brand of supporters, which is a good setup for him for 2028, regardless of who wins the election. Um,
Mhm.
but it's almost as though Donald Trump thinks because he can only serve one term, he'll go for the very, very best. And I don't feel that that was the case with Kamala Harris. She could have gone for Josh Shapiro, who
Mhm.
I think Josh Shapiro could have very easily given JD Vance a very good run for his money on that
I think
stage.
so. Shapiro's a sharp guy, and
Oh, yeah.
also I think the general consensus on both sides of the political divide is that Shapiro would have been a far better pick.
Mm,
Yeah.
very much so. But then she went with Tim Walz, which is a strange decision, just because not only because he's clearly not good at debate,
Mhm.
not which that's okay. Some people aren't. Uh, he also has a lot of, let's call them, negative aspects to him in terms of easily verifiable falsehoods that he's talked about. So, for example, embellishing his military service to some degree, claiming to have been, in Hong Kong during the Tiananmen massacre, which he clearly wasn't, and other things that have come to light in recent weeks. And yet, he's the one who's supposed to make Harris seem less like a left coast liberal. How do you square that?
Yeah, that is strange. I mean, obviously because Tim Walz is, essentially, a Midwesterner. I mean, I believe he's originally from Nebraska, actually, I believe, although he kind of talks as if he's born and raised in Minnesota.
Mm.
But still, he's, more or less I hate this term, it's kind of a derogatory term, but more or less a flyover country guy.
Mm.
So therefore not a West Coast elite, but in terms of his politics, he's at least as far left as Kamala, if not actually further left than her.
Okay, that's an interesting take, and that there are Liberty Nation's senior political analyst Tim Donner has written on this about the what a lot of people would consider far left policies that have come out of Minnesota, and I think that's a record he is going to have to contend with. Let's talk the high points of the debate. For me, and I sorry, keep going about me here, but for me, I was really happy to not see people shouting at each other. I thought that was really quite a nice thing because it did allow each side to dig a little more into the policies. Now, maybe they weren't specific policies, but they certainly clear road signs to the direction of whichever administration wins was going to take.
Yes, yeah, I think so. I mean, certainly both of the vice presidential candidates did take their opportunities to have a dig at
Mm.
their not at their counterparts, but at their counterparts running mates, i.e., so they both dug at Waltz certainly was very critical of Trump. And at times, Vance certainly mentioned Kamala Harris a few times, and what he described as her, policy failures or whatever. So they did, but at the same time, it was kind of a civil affair. I mean, there were a few times during the debate when the two candidates more or less agreed with each other, or
Yeah.
certainly, if not agreed, then at least kind of they they indicated that they understood where the other guy was coming from. So that was kind of an interesting aspect of the debate. Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
both were. I think both were trying to put across that Midwestern nice kind of
mhm,
persona, which it was
yeah.
nice to see. I thought it was nice to see.
Mhm.
Although you say about the candidates agreeing with one another, I think Tim Walz didn't quite realize that this would be viewed on a split screen. So when specifically, I think when JD Vance said, "You're right, we shouldn't blame Kamala Harris for inviting children to become drug mules, but she did allow it to happen, to encourage it to happen through her policies," words to that effect. And Tim Walz is nodding away. And he did that several times, and I thought that's going to meme town. That will be the biggest meme of the month, no doubt. So coming out of this, I don't think any minds were changed. Did the needle move?
I don't think it did, purely because we're talking about the vice presidents here. I think, yeah, I mean, for a vice presidential candidate during a debate to move the needle in the direction of his or her side, they would have to be, they would have to say something kind of outstanding and that nobody had heard even the presidential candidate say before.
Yeah.
They'd have to mention something that made people sit up and go, "Oh wow, I didn't realize that you guys were going to do this if you got into power, and now I'm in, whatever." So no, and that didn't happen. So did it move the needle? I don't think so. I definitely think. I think Vance. I saw one interesting headline in I believe it was a Washington Examiner, and it said Vance wins and Waltz survives. And I thought that was a pretty good take on it. I mean, I think nobody on either side is really, apart from the hyper partisan leftists,
Hmm.
nobody on either side is honestly saying that Tim Waltz won that debate, or even that it was a tie. But certainly Waltz he definitely did survive it. There was some shaky moments, but he didn't completely mess it up.
That's a very good point, and I'll take your quote from the Examiner last week, and I'll raise you one from the New Yorker, which said in its lead story, the opening line, "The pace was sometimes a little too much for Tim Walz." And I thought that pretty much summed it up. However, what I noticed in the aftermath over the following days on that was that there was a big spin machine in operation, especially in the social media platforms with Kamala campaign surrogates, Barack Obama, Joe Biden, or all Jen Psaki, or all pushing out this idea that Tim Walz somehow rose above JD Vance during the debate. And I mean, I'm not sure if all of our audience is familiar with the term ratioed. I know you are, Graham, but what that means is that when somebody posts something on social media, and it means that the vast majority of the comments below it are negatively reacting to you, you have therefore been ratioed. And that was the situation for Joe Biden, for Barack Obama, for the Kamala campaign. Um, and I don't think anybody's buying that particular spin.
No, I don't think so, really. I mean, even the left-leaning media, and I'm going to differentiate between left-leaning and like unapologetically far left. The left-leaning media, which a lot of people like to refer to as the mainstream media, which
Mm,
seems an odd term these days, but I think they're all generally in agreement that while Tim Walz did not have a disastrous debate by any means, he certainly was, behind the eight ball, so to speak. It was kind of he wasn't up to speed. You know, your thing about the New Yorker headline is a very good example. He wasn't firing on as many cylinders as JD Vance was. Let's put it this way.
Well, as the great man himself once said, he's a bit of a knucklehead. We'll be back with Graham J. Noble after this short break. Don't go anywhere.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.
Welcome back to Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network. I remain your host, Mark Angelides, and we're joined again by Liberty Nation's chief political correspondent, Graham J. Noble. Now, earlier in the show, we were talking the aftermath of the vice presidential debate, which is a good show. If you haven't heard it, go back, listen again. If you have heard it, go back, listen again. It was a good show. Do it anyway. And what
Did you mention it was a good show?
It was a good show. Did I mention that?
Yeah.
What I would like to move on to now is really talk about the election 2024. We're roughly 4 weeks out, and each team is failing to pull ahead of the other in any substantial way. What do you think the roadmap for the next 4 weeks is going to look like, Graham?
Well, it's interesting. I mean, for a start, the number of polls that are showing this to be such a tight race, I'm not sure that I buy that. It seems a little, I don't know. That seems a little strange to me. And the only reason why I say that is I'm not doing that to suggest that I'm favoring either candidate. But what I am saying is that, Kamala Harris's rallies, the people know this has been filmed and posted to social media, that, she's bussing in people to attend her campaigns, and also she's doing these little bits where, like, she went to the sandwich shop in Pennsylvania there, and they actually threw out all the regular customers and replaced them with people who were put there in the restaurant specifically to make it look as if she was going around and asking questions of regular customers. And these things are being documented, and so it's like, where you have to ask yourself, where exactly is her support coming from if she's having to do these things? So I find that an interesting facet of this campaign.
And what about Donald Trump? We have noticed that since the 2 assassination attempts, he has been doing smaller campaign events, but I'm not sure that these smaller events are necessarily a reflection of a lack of support, but rather one of security. I might be wrong on that, though. What's your take?
No, I believe you're exactly right, Mark, because we do know, for instance, that just maybe a week or two ago, the Trump campaign had been planning a large outdoor event in somewhere in Wisconsin. And the Secret Service basically told him, well, the initial story that came out was the Secret Service told him, you can't go to Wisconsin because we don't have the assets to protect you. I believe that turned out to be, that wasn't quite the entire truth of the story. What the Secret Service actually told him was that, you can't have a huge outdoor event. It's got to be an indoor event, so that we can more easily control the security environment. And I think that's what's going on here. Yes.
Okay, so essentially both candidates are going to be spending the remaining 4 weeks crisscrossing the country, going to all of the swing states. And it's in the swing states that the polling really gets granular, because if we look at the polling averages, you have national polls put Kamala Harris a couple of points ahead, which is interesting, but it's not really indicative of anything, because there are more people in California and New York that kind of outweigh the other places across the country. But when you get into the battleground polling, I mean, that is fractional. That is absolutely fractional. And I guess it's got to come down to whoever runs the best ground game in 3 or 4 states will lock up the election. Do you think both campaigns have the energy for it? Because, and this, I might be in a minority of one here, but it seems to me that there isn't as much energy on either side today as there was a couple of weeks ago.
It does seem to be the case, doesn't it? I must admit, you're not in a minority of, even if we're perhaps in a minority of 2, I tend to agree with you.
The
It does.
individual, the greatest minority protections in the world.
That's exactly right. Yeah, wasn't it? It is interesting that there does seem to be, I'm not going to say a lack of energy, but less energy.
Mm.
The whole joy campaign that Kamala Harris kind of was firing on all cylinders when she first kind of became the nominee and replaced Joe Biden for the 2024 race. There was a lot of energy. It was a very high energy campaign. I mean, there was no substance to it, perhaps, but it was very high energy, and it was all about joy, and and everyone's going to get a puppy and all this kind of stuff. And
It
now
was very Winfrey-esque, wasn't it?
it
And
was
you'll get a tax break, and you'll get
right.
some handouts, and you'll.
Yeah. And now it does seem to be a kind of almost like a lower key thing here. And I'm not sure that I could give you a fantastic rationale as to why that is. I do actually believe that the two assassination attempts targeting Donald Trump possibly contributed to that.
Yes, it's one of the key things that were talked about in the wake of both of those attempts was that there needs to be a toning down of vitriol on both sides, and I think that although they're still trying to make out the case that each one will be the de facto end of democracy as it's known in a republic, I think that really is curtailing some of the bravado that each side wants to put out. But I think you're very astute to point out that this whole joy campaign thing, it hasn't reared its head in at least the last week or so. I haven't seen that anywhere. I haven't seen the post saying we're bringing joy back to America. It's almost as though they thought that was a good campaign slogan and then ditched it.
I think they missed the mark completely on that, actually, because I think that whole almost unfounded optimism was not working, because I think they quickly realized, and perhaps they haven't even realized, but they may have realized now that a lot of voters, even people who probably were going to, intended the entire time that they were going to vote for Joe Biden. And then when Joe Biden was, I'm not going to say stepped down, because I believe that he was basically shoved aside. I don't think they realized that even people were without question intending to vote for her, are saying, look, I don't want to hear about the joy and the rainbows and all that kind of stuff. I want to hear about what you're going to do about this economy and what you're going to do about inflation and and the immigration system. I think people were like, enough with the joy already. Tell us what you are going to do, and be specific.
Yes, it's something that's actually very apparent in more modern, you know what, I shouldn't even say more modern ones, because it's been a facet of presidential elections for a very long time, is the slogan and the sloganeering involved. And Kamala Harris went from joy as the slogan, tried out a new way forward, then realized that means that essentially she's trying to cut herself off from her previous 3.5 years, which is a record 4 years, I guess, almost 4 years, is a record that she has to at least try and bolster, because it's, I'll do the job once you give it to me.
Yeah.
But she's already been in the job. And so they're struggling to find a working slogan, whereas Donald Trump's been quite smart with this, I think. 2016 was Make America Great Again. And now it's back to MAGA again, Make America Great Again. But it's also MAHA, isn't it? Make America Healthy Again, with the infusion of Robert F. Kennedy. Graham, final word for you. If you could suggest a new campaign slogan for Miss Harris, what would it be?
So, a new slogan for Kamala Harris. Well, I think if she was going to be brutally honest about what she is actually running on, her new campaign slogan should be, I am not Donald Trump.
And that's a great final word. Graham J. Noble, thanks ever so much for joining us. And that's all we have time for on this week's special edition of Liberty Nation Radio, heard coast to coast on the Radio America Network from our flagship station in the nation's capital, WWRC in Washington, D.C. I've been your host, Mark Angelides. I'd like to take a moment to thank our guests, Legal Affairs Editor Scott Cosenza and political analyst Graham J. Noble. And also to remind you Liberty Nation does not endorse candidates, campaigns, or legislation, and this presentation is no endorsement. And all that leaves me to do is thank you, the listeners at home, for taking the time to tune in and join us each week. Thank you for being here. You are appreciated.
We dismiss history at our peril.
Liberty Nation Radio with Mark Angelides.